This summer was huge. We got to finally see all our favorite Marvel heroes together on one screen. Some are calling it one of the most ambitious cinematic experiences ever. And of course, I'm talking about The Chef Show.
When we all come together for a meal, you appreciate it because it doesn't happen all the time.
The Chef Show is a Netflix original series created by Jon Favreau based on his previous movie, Chef. Now, I'm not one for watching a lot of cooking shows, but this one specifically is actually very pleasant to watch. An episode of The Chef Show usually consists of Jon Favreau along with Chef Roy Choi as they experiment learning new recipes, or most of the time Roy teaching Jon all of his recipes. And then they usually sit down with a lot of celebrities, specifically Avenger stars, and talk about really anything, not even food related. You get to see Robert Downey Jr., the Russo brothers, Gwyneth Paltrow, forget that she was in Spider-Man.
You were in Spider-Man.
No.
Yeah.
I was in Avengers.
No, you were in Spider-Man also.
All while eating delicious food. Basically, the Chef Show is awesome, and it really reminds you a lot of how great his original movie Chef was back when it came out. So this video specifically, I want to take a look at the movie Chef, see what it's about, why he made it, why he directed, wrote, and starred in it all himself, and what it tells us about his career as a director. Because believe it or not, there was a specific reason that he did make this movie, and I believe that there's a specific reason that he made this TV show and released it specifically this summer. So let's start taking a look at the man himself, Jon Favreau. Now, in the early to mid-90s, he made his debut as an actor and screenwriter. Most notably, he wrote the movie Swingers, which proved to be a big hit. He continued to guest star in various TV shows and movies before he was ready to make his director debut with the movie Made. Now, this movie really, honestly, didn't do too much as far as getting his name out there. It wasn't really until his second film that he directed, and that was Elf. Elf was huge. Everybody knows Elf. It's an instant Christmas classic, and I would even say it's probably one of the last Christmas classic movies we have seen. His next film that he decided to direct was Zathura. Now, I'm sure you probably don't remember this movie because it didn't really stand the test of time, but it was kind of like Jumanji in a way. It wasn't a sequel, but it was essentially a very, very similar movie. So he goes from Elf, a Christmas classic, to Zathura, what was hoping to be another classic board game movie. What does he decide to do next? He kicks off the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I don't want to see this on your MySpace page. Please, no gang signs.
That's right, he decides to direct and also co-star in the movie Iron Man. Now, I don't need to go into how big this movie is and what it led us to, because you should already know that. 22 plus movies later, and the MCU is still going strong. Probably the strongest it's ever been. It's actually awesome watching him and Robert Downey Jr. on The Chef Show reminiscing about those moments filming this movie, because you really kind of get a grip for what he was trying to do and how successful he was in making this movie. It's actually great to listen to Jon Favreau talk about this movie and what it took to make it and how difficult it was, because they knew that they wanted this to lead to an Avengers movie. They just weren't sure if it was going to work, so they had to create a movie that worked well on its own, but also had Nick Fury in the end credits scene just in case it got kicked off and it could lead to other things. So up until this point, his three best well-known movies are Elf, Zathura, and Iron Man. What does that tell us about how he directs? And what that tells me is that he is someone that can create a completely new experience based off of an already existing genre. We got a Christmas classic, which filmmakers haven't been able to touch in decades, and finally we have a new modern Christmas classic. And then you have a superhero genre, one that a lot of people in 2008 thought was dying. He revives, and now it's bigger than ever. The argument for why I think Zathura doesn't exactly work is because it's too much like Jumanji, and Jumanji was already a classic. We didn't need just another remade version of this. We needed him to do what he does best, and that is create something new already within that existing genre. What happens next? After Iron Man, you know, Iron Man 2 comes out, and it comes out quick. Looking back at interviews, everyone talks about the same thing, that this movie was really rushed. They just wanted to get it out because once they saw how successful Iron Man was, they needed to cash in on this Avengers cinematic universe. The way that Jon Favreau describes making Iron Man and Iron Man 2 is that he wanted this to be a trilogy, and that was the case for a lot of movies, specifically superhero movies up until this point. You had the Dark Knight trilogy, you had the Spider-Man trilogy, you had the X-Men trilogy, and that's just what directors did. They made 3 movies of one superhero, and that's what Jon Favreau kind of expected would happen. Instead, what happened is Marvel wanted to create 2 Iron Man movies, bring in other characters like Nick Fury and Black Widow, and from there spin off into other superhero movies and then bring them back all to make the Avengers. All that simply to say that Jon Favreau just didn't have the same vision for this movie. And as a result, Iron Man 2 is honestly not the biggest hit when it comes to fans' favorite MCU movie. If you look on most fans' ranked lists, mine included, Iron Man 2 is usually at the bottom of the list, right down there with the second Thor movie and The Incredible Hulk. But it did make a lot of money, and from a studio standpoint, that's what they wanted. The next movie that he directed is one that I've actually never seen. I honestly have forgotten about this movie until I started looking at his filmography. So what I will say about Cowboys and Aliens is that critics are very mutual on this movie. I don't think anyone's a huge fan of it. Box office wise, it barely made enough money to cancel its cost. So after all of this, what does Jon Favreau learn about himself, and what does he decide to do? Well, he makes the movie Chef.
I get to touch people's lives with what I do, and I love it. And I want to share this with you.
I love the movie Chef. Honestly, it's probably one of the most underrated films in my opinion. Everyone needs to go watch this. It is so heartwarming. It tells the story of a chef who works at one of the best, fanciest restaurants in LA, gets into an altercation with a food critic, and eventually decides to quit. What does he do next? He goes on an adventure. He buys a food truck and travels the country selling his own creation. So essentially, to put it in simpler terms, you have this high-profile chef who makes this restaurant a lot of money, gets fed up with making exactly what they want him to make, he quits his job, and then goes, travels, and makes exactly the food that he wants to make, and no one has to tell him what to make. If this is sounding all too familiar, it should, because this movie is a direct representation of Jon Favreau's career. And he hardly even hides it. Essentially, in all the interviews, people are kind of baiting him, seeing if he'll cave, and he's pretty much upfront about it. He's like, you know, yeah, I wanted to make an indie film. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. Now, talking more specifically of why he wanted to make this character a chef and not a director, and he essentially just said that food is more cinematic to watch. And when you watch someone make a movie in a movie, it's just not very exciting to witness. So he hires Roy Choi as food truck expert to be the co-producer for this film, and all the food in the movie is real, and that's why it looks so appealing. Not only that, but Jon Favreau also gets a bunch of his friends in Hollywood to come play smaller roles in this movie, and you can really feel like this is the movie that he's always wanted to make. And the end of this movie is so heartwarming. It ends with him getting what he wants. He opens up a restaurant in LA with everything on the menu that he wanted to make. If only Jon Favreau's filmography could have actually looked like this. So what does he do next? He directs The Jungle Book. Now, The Jungle Book is anything but a small independent film. In fact, this is one of his biggest blockbuster hits up until this date. However, what Jon Favreau was able to do with The Jungle Book is revolutionary in CGI technology. The way that these animals look are so real, and critics absolutely loved this movie. Not only that, but it made a lot of money. It felt like Jon Favreau has figured it out. What you do is you take an existing genre like a Christmas movie, like a superhero movie, like a Disney movie, and you recreate it and make it an instant classic. Now, up until this point, we've seen a couple Disney live-action movies that were remade from existing animated property, like Cinderella, 101 and 102 Dalmatians, or like that 90s Jungle Book movie that not a lot of people remember. But this movie solidified that Disney live action movies can be remade and be really good. So once again, here is Jon Favreau starting this new trend of redefining a genre. It's what he does best, right? Not necessarily big budget movies, not necessarily sequels, but creating something that already exists but making it his own. Then he does The Lion King.
It means no worries for the rest of your days. It's our problem free.
When The Jungle Book was seen to be very successful, it was obvious Jon Favreau had to do The Lion King. Who else could handle this property and make it look as real as The Jungle Book looks? The issue with this is that The Lion King to Jon Favreau has the same issue that Iron Man 2 had to Jon Favreau. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a sequel to The Jungle Book, but all the issues that he had working on Iron Man 2 as a sequel are the issues he has with The Lion King. First, he does not get enough freedom to do what he wants with this property. And in The Jungle Book, it's not like the movie is drastically different from the cartoon, but the technology was new and he was able to be creative and do something original. Now with The Lion King, do not get me wrong, because the graphics are incredible and it looks like these are real animals. The problem is that this isn't new to what he's been doing, and anything else that could possibly be new or original in this movie, he isn't allowed to do. Rather than Jon Favreau going out, finding the Jungle Book property and saying, I want to make this movie real, instead Disney finds him and say, hey, we need to make a lot of money on this movie, so can you come and do it? But financially it's successful. It's now the highest grossing animated movie for Disney. Critically though, it's not doing so hot. And just like Iron Man 2, this movie is making a lot of money, but it's lacking critical praise. So here we are. Jon Favreau, he makes some brilliant movies, but he gets trapped making movies that aren't original and that he just doesn't really want to do. So what does he do after Lion King? Well, right now he's set to write a lot of stories for the Disney Plus original series, The Mandalorian, which is going to be great for the Star Wars universe, and I think this is the right direction Jon Favreau needs to do to, again, create a new property within an existing popular property. However, it's also rumored that he's going to direct a sequel to The Jungle Book, so I think we can all kind of assume how that's going to go. But there's one more thing, and that's the thing that I started this whole video. The Chef Show. I don't think it's any coincidence that The Chef Show was released the same summer as The Lion King. Why, you ask? Because I think The Chef Show is brilliant and exactly what Jon Favreau needed after making all these big budget movies. The Lion King, it took years to make. The Chef Show, it looks like it could have been filmed within a week. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he filmed it like 2 months before it was actually put on Netflix. It's simple but sweet. It's Jon Favreau hanging out with all his friends, making the food that he wants to make. And you know what? I respect that. Jon Favreau, you go make the food that you want to make. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please leave a like. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. We have all sorts of exciting things happening on this channel. But until then, I will see you next time.